A 6-year-old girl was tied to the railroad tracks on a dangerous, isolated curve. It was late afternoon. Fog blanketed the tracks, muffling the sounds of the nearby highway. The child's cries could barely be heard. That's when a millionaire, driving by in his luxury car on his way to a newly purchased ranch, saw something odd on the tracks. What happened next would forever change both their destinies, revealing secrets that had been buried for 6 long years. Subscribe to the channel for heartwarming stories delivered daily. The penthouse office was a monument to solitude disguised as success. Tinted windows filtered the golden light of late afternoon, casting shadows that danced on imported mahogany furniture. The millionaire stood motionless before the panoramic window, watching the city stretch out like an infinite chessboard beneath him. At 42, he had conquered everything money could buy. Companies spanning 3 continents, properties in offshore havens, cars that cost more than entire houses. But that afternoon, as on every other for the past 6 years, he felt the suffocating weight of emptiness that no acquisition could fill. His secretary knocked on the door, interrupting his thoughts. "Sir, the lawyer is here to discuss the purchase of the ranch." He nodded without turning. The ranch in question was just another whim, a retreat where he hoped to find the peace that had haunted him since that terrible night. The night he lost everything that truly mattered. "Send him in," he murmured, adjusting his Italian silk tie. The lawyer entered carrying a leather briefcase, his serious demeanor contrasting with the luxurious surroundings. "The documentation is ready. The property is yours, but there are a few outstanding matters that require your presence on site today." The millionaire checked his Swiss watch. There was still time to resolve the bureaucratic matters before nightfall. He grabbed the keys to his sports car and left the office, leaving behind another day of empty meetings and decisions that moved millions, but didn't touch his soul. The Lamborghini slid through the city streets like a knife cutting through the fabric of the afternoon. The engine purred a melody of contained power, but he barely noticed. His mind drifted through memories he insisted on keeping buried, fragments of a time when he believed in love and the future. The city lights began to twinkle as he took the highway leading to the rural property. The landscape gradually changed, skyscrapers giving way to verdant fields and rolling hills. The air became cleaner, filled with the scent of damp earth and wild vegetation. It was then that his life of luxury and isolation would find its turning point, though he didn't yet know it. Destiny had prepared an encounter that would challenge everything he believed about himself, about the past, and about the possibility of redemption. The road wound through a sparsely populated area where the railroad tracks cut through the landscape like a metal scar. Fog began to form in the valleys, creating an ethereal atmosphere that seemed to foreshadow something extraordinary. He accelerated, eager to reach his destination and quickly resolve the final details of the purchase. He had no idea that, just a few miles away, a helpless child awaited him on the tracks, and that the next few minutes would forever change the course of both their lives. The silence of the rural afternoon contrasted sharply with the constant noise of the city he had left behind. Here, every sound had meaning: the song of the birds preparing for their night's rest, the whisper of the wind in the leaves, and in the distance, almost imperceptible yet, the distant rumble of a train approaching along the abandoned railroad track. The sharp curve in the country road appeared suddenly, forcing the millionaire to slow down the Lamborghini. It was at that moment that something unusual caught his attention. Through the thickening fog, a patch of light color contrasted with the dark metal of the railroad tracks. He braked sharply, his heart pounding for no apparent reason. For a moment, he considered continuing to drive. He was late, and other people's problems were not his specialty. But something, a primal intuition, an instinct that money couldn't buy, made him stop completely. He got out of the car with hesitant movements, leaving the door open and the engine running. His Italian shoes slipped slightly on the damp grass as he approached the tracks. What he saw made him freeze in horror. A girl of approximately 6 years old was tied to the tracks, her small hands struggling desperately against the ropes that bound her. Her yellow dress, dirty and torn, looked like a withered flower against the cold metal. Tears streamed down her face, leaving clean streaks in the dirt. "My God," he whispered, his voice hoarse with shock. The child looked up when she heard his voice. They were large brown eyes, full of fear, but also of a desperate hope. "Please," she murmured, her voice almost inaudible, "please get me out of here." It was then that he heard it, the distant but unmistakable sound of an approaching train. The whistle echoed through the foggy landscape, a metallic wail that chilled his blood. There was no time to call for help, no time to think. He ran to the girl, falling to his knees on the rough tracks, his hands, accustomed only to signing contracts, and shaking hands in meetings, trembled as he fought against the tight knots. The ropes were thick, tied with cruel skill by someone who knew exactly what they were doing. The sound of the train grew louder. He could feel the vibration in the tracks now, a tremor that rose through the earth and spread through his body. Sweat dripped down his forehead despite the cool afternoon air. "It's okay, sweetheart," he said, trying to keep his voice steady so as not to scare the child even more. "I'm going to get you out of here." The ropes began to yield under his desperate insistence. First the ones that bound her delicate ankles, then the ones that tied her small wrists. The girl helped as best she could, pulling and wriggling. The train appeared on the curve, its light cutting through the fog like a blade. The engineer must have been watching the tracks ahead, but the curve and the fog made it impossible to distinguish two figures kneeling on the tracks. With a last desperate pull, the millionaire freed the child. Without thinking, he picked her up in his arms and rolled off the tracks, protecting her with his own body as the train roared past inches from where they had been seconds before. They remained there, both trembling, breathing heavily. He still held her close, feeling her small heartbeat like a frightened bird. The train disappeared into the fog, taking the immediate danger with it, but leaving behind a reality that would change everything. When he finally managed to calm down enough to look at the child he had saved, the millionaire found those brown eyes fixed on his face. There was something in them, something beyond fear and gratitude, a recognition that made him shudder. "You," she whispered, her voice still trembling, "you're the man in the picture Mommy showed me." The millionaire felt as if the world had stopped spinning. The child's words echoed in his mind, impossible and yet terribly familiar. He held her at arm's length, studying that small face with an intensity that bordered on desperation. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice almost inaudible. The girl wiped her tears with the back of her dirty hand. "Mommy had a picture of you. She showed it to me lots of times and said," she hesitated, as if the words were too big for her small mouth, "she said you were my daddy." The shock was so intense that he almost dropped her. 6 years. 6 years since he had lost his fiancée, in a mysterious accident when she was 5 months pregnant. 6 years since the doctors told him that there were no survivors, that both she and the baby had died in the crash. "That's impossible," he murmured, more to himself than to the child. "She died. You both died." But as he spoke, a part of his rational mind began to catalogue details: the shape of the girl's eyes, the curve of her small nose, the way she tilted her head when she heard him speak. There was something familiar there, something that made his heart race for reasons he didn't want to examine. "Mommy didn't die right away," the girl said, her voice gaining strength. "She was hurt real bad, but she didn't die. She took care of me until she got real sick. Then the mean lady came and said she was going to take me to you." The millionaire's mind worked frantically, trying to process this information. If it was true, if by some miracle his fiancée had survived long enough to give birth, then this child could really be his daughter. But who was this mean lady who had left her tied to the tracks? "What's your name?" he asked gently, helping her to her feet. "Mommy called me her little star," she said, smiling for the first time. "But the mean lady called me Trouble." The nickname hit him like a punch to the gut. Little Star was what he used to call his fiancée when they joked about the future, about the children they would have. She always said she would name their first daughter her Little Star. Trembling, he picked her up again. It was impossible to leave her there, but taking her meant opening doors that he had sealed with padlocks of pain and despair. It meant confronting the possibility that everything he had believed about that terrible night might be wrong. "I'm going to take you to a safe place," he said, walking towards the car. "We're going to find out the truth about all this." As he placed the child in the passenger seat and fastened her seatbelt, she looked around the luxurious interior with wide eyes. "It's so pretty," she murmured. "Mommy said you had pretty things." He swallowed hard. "What else did your mommy say about me?" "That you were good, but real sad. That you didn't know about me because bad people lied to you." She looked at him with a seriousness that was frightening for a 6-year-old. "The mean lady said you didn't want me, but Mommy said that wasn't true." Driving along the country roads towards the city, the millionaire wrestled with a whirlwind of emotions. Anger at having been deceived, if he had been. Pain at the possibility of having lost precious years with a daughter he didn't even know existed. And fear of believing, fear of discovering that it was all just a cruel coincidence, or worse, some kind of elaborate scam. But looking at the child asleep in the seat beside him, exhausted by the ordeal, he felt something he hadn't experienced in years, the urgent need to protect someone. And beneath all the confusion and disbelief, a small flame of hope began to flicker in his hardened heart. The mansion loomed against the night sky like a palace out of a fairy tale, its illuminated windows creating golden patterns in the darkness. The girl, awakened by the movement of the car, stopping, pressed her nose against the glass, her eyes reflecting childlike wonder. "Do you live here?" she asked, her voice full of awe. The millionaire turned off the engine, watching his own house through her eyes. How many times had he arrived there and felt only the weight of emptiness? Now, with the child's presence, the place seemed different, less like a mausoleum of achievements and more like a potential home. "Yes," he replied simply, getting out of the car and walking around to help her out. The housekeeper, a middle-aged woman with grey hair pulled back in an impeccable bun, appeared at the front door. Her expression of professional surprise quickly turned to maternal concern when she saw the child. "Sir, I wasn't aware you were expecting company," she said, descending the steps to greet them. "Neither was I," he murmured. "She'll be staying with us for a while. Could you prepare the blue guest room and perhaps find some clean clothes?" The housekeeper nodded, her experience allowing her to accept unusual situations without asking unnecessary questions. "Of course, sir. And what about dinner?" He looked at the girl, who was walking beside him with small, hesitant steps. "What would you like to eat?" "Anything," she replied quickly, as if afraid of asking for too much. "I don't eat much." The simple answer struck him deeply. When was the last time he had worried about what someone wanted to eat? When had he thought about pleasing another person without expecting anything in return? Inside the house, the girl walked with reverence, gently touching the expensive furniture and observing the works of art that decorated the walls. She stopped before a portrait that dominated the entrance hall, a painting of himself, commissioned years ago for reasons that now seemed futile. "You're real handsome in the picture," she said, "but you look sadder in real life." The observation, made with the brutal honesty of children, left him speechless. How many people in his life had noticed his sadness? How many cared enough to mention it? In the room prepared by the housekeeper, the girl explored every corner with restrained curiosity. The king-size bed seemed to swallow her when she sat on the edge, her feet dangling in the air without touching the floor. "It's so big," she said, smiling shyly. "You can sleep anywhere you want," he replied, sitting down in a nearby armchair. "This is your home now." The words came out before he could fully think them through. His home. He didn't even know if she was really his daughter. But something in his gut, something deeper than logic, had already made the decision. During dinner, he watched her eat with careful deliberation, as if each bite was precious. She asked questions about everything, about the food, about the house, about him. Simple questions that revealed a sharp intelligence and a thirst for knowledge that impressed him. "Why do you have so many things if you're always sad?" she asked, chewing on a piece of bread. He paused, his fork halfway to his mouth. "How do you know I'm always sad?" "Your eyes," she said, as if it were obvious. "Mommy had the same sad eyes sometimes. She said it was missing you." "Missing what?" "You." The simplicity of the answer hit him like an avalanche. Here was a child who possibly was his daughter, talking about a woman he had loved and lost, creating connections that he couldn't fully process. After dinner, while the housekeeper gave the girl a bath, he sat alone in his study, trying to organize his thoughts. He needed answers, he needed proof. But more than anything, he needed to understand why this child's presence had awakened feelings in him that he thought he had buried forever. When she appeared in the doorway of the study, wearing pajamas borrowed from the housekeeper that were much too big, he felt something break inside his chest. She looked so small, so vulnerable, but also so brave. "Can I sleep in here with you?" she asked. "I have nightmares sometimes about the mean lady." He didn't hesitate. "Of course." And for the first time in 6 years, the millionaire didn't sleep, alone. The following days passed like a strange and wonderful dream. The millionaire cancelled meetings, postponed business trips, and for the first time in his career, put someone else above his business interests. The girl transformed the silent mansion into a place full of life, her laughter echoing through the empty halls like long-forgotten music. She followed him around the house like a curious shadow, asking questions about everything, from how the private elevator worked to the meaning of the abstract artwork that decorated the walls. Each question revealed a sharp mind and a hunger for knowledge that surprised him. "Why do you work so much if you already have so much money?" she asked one morning as they had breakfast on the terrace overlooking the gardens. He paused, a slice of toast halfway to his mouth. It was a simple question, but one that no one had ever asked him before. "I always thought working was important," he replied slowly. "More important than playing." "I don't play." She looked at him with an expression of genuine pity. "That's real sad. Mommy said playing was like breathing for your heart." That afternoon, for the first time in decades, he found himself playing. It started when she asked to see the garden and discovered the ornamental pond. She wanted to feed the goldfish, and he ended up kneeling beside her on the grass, watching the golden creatures glide through the clear water. "Look, that one's fat, like you said you got after eating too much." "Chocolate," she said, pointing to a particularly plump fish. He laughed, really laughed, for the first time in years. The sound came out rusty, like a machine long unused, but it was real. Meanwhile, he had discreetly hired a private investigator to verify the girl's story. The information that came back was disturbing and, at the same time, liberating. There were records of his fiancée surviving the accident, transferred to a distant hospital in critical condition. There was a birth certificate for a child, although the documents were fragmentary and some had mysteriously disappeared from the files. What intrigued him most was discovering that someone had deliberately hidden this information from him. Someone had paid to keep secret the survival of his fiancée and the birth of his daughter. But who and why? The answer began to take shape when the investigator brought a blurry photograph of a woman leaving the child on the tracks. Although the image was of poor quality, there was something familiar about that silhouette, something that made his blood run cold. "Do you recognize this woman?" asked the investigator. He studied the photo more closely, a terrible premonition growing in his chest. "Maybe. I need more information." That night, while the girl slept peacefully in the room next to his, he stayed up late, pieces of a sinister puzzle beginning to fit together. There were people in his life who benefited from his loneliness, from his obsessive dedication to work, people who had reasons to want him to never find out about his daughter, but who would be capable of such cruelty. Who would have the courage to separate a father from his daughter, leaving an innocent child tied to the railroad tracks? The answer came in the form of an unexpected visit the next morning. He was in the garden with the girl, teaching her how to skip stones on the pond, when the housekeeper appeared with a worried expression. "Sir, there's a woman at the door. She says she's your partner and needs to speak with you urgently." He stiffened. His senior partner, the woman who had been his right hand in business for over a decade, the person he trusted most after the death of his fiancée, the woman who always comforted him in difficult times, who always had a logical explanation for every problem, who always encouraged him to focus on work instead of getting lost in memories. "Tell her I'm busy," he murmured. "Sir," she insists. She says it's about the situation with the child. His blood ran cold. How did she know about the girl? He had been extremely discreet, not telling anyone about the rescue or about his suspicions. "Unless—" "Stay here," he said to the girl, trying to keep his voice calm. "Don't leave the garden." As he walked towards the house, each step sounded like a funeral drum. He was about to discover truths that would change everything he thought he knew about his life, about the people he trusted, and about the 6 years of loneliness he had endured unnecessarily. She was standing in the living room, elegant as always, her blonde hair perfectly styled, and a smile that he had known for over a decade. But now, watching her with new eyes, he noticed something he had never noticed before. The coldness behind that smile, the calculation in every seemingly casual gesture. "Honey," she said, approaching with her arms outstretched as if to embrace him. "I heard you had an interesting encounter a few days ago." He took a step back, maintaining distance. "How did you find out?" Her smile faltered for a fraction of a second. News travels fast in these parts. A child rescued from the tracks by a prominent businessman. It's hard to keep that under wraps. But he knew she was lying. He hadn't reported the incident to the police yet, hadn't told anyone. The only way she could know would be if she were directly involved. "Where is she?" he asked, his voice taking on a tone she had never heard before. Cold, controlled, dangerous. "Who, darling?" "My daughter." For the first time in all the years he had known her, he saw her truly unravel. The smile disappeared completely, replaced by an expression that revealed the real woman behind the carefully constructed mask. "Your daughter died 6 years ago," she said, but her voice trembled slightly. "Along with that pathetic woman you thought you loved." "No," he said, taking another step towards her. "They survived. You knew that, didn't you? You always knew." She laughed, but it was a bitter sound, devoid of any humor. "You don't understand anything, do you? Even after all these years, you're still the same naive man who falls for any pretty face. Explain." "She was a gold digger," she exploded, finally letting the mask fall completely. "A little nobody who wanted to take everything you built. I saved you from destroying your life." The revelation hit him like a lightning bolt. "You caused the accident." "I prevented a greater disaster," she said, recovering some of her composure. "She was planning to marry you, have your children, and then take half of everything in the divorce. I protected our business. I protected your future." "Our business?" His voice was dangerously low now. "You did this for the business? I did it for love," she screamed, finally revealing the truth she had hidden for so many years. "I've loved you for over a decade. I built this empire by your side. I was the one who should have been in your place. I was the one who should have had your children." He felt nausea rising in his throat. The woman he had trusted, who had been his confidant in moments of weakness, who had consoled his pain. She was the architect of all his tragedy. "The accident didn't kill her," she continued, now speaking rapidly, as if the words were poison she needed to expel. "She survived long enough to have the child, but she was so injured, so weak. I offered to help. I said I would take care of everything." "And you did," he said, finally understanding the extent of the betrayal. "You took care that I never knew my daughter existed. I placed her in a distant foster home. I paid for her to be well cared for, but far away from you. She would have a better life without the complications of your fortune. Until you decided to kill her." Her face twisted with anger. "She escaped the foster home. She started asking questions, looking for you. Some people started connecting the dots. I couldn't allow her to destroy everything we built together. So, you tied her to the railroad tracks. It was supposed to be quick," she whispered, finally showing some remorse. "She wasn't going to suffer, and you would never know." The confession was interrupted by a sound that chilled both their blood. A frightened little voice from the doorway. "That's the mean lady," said the girl, hidden behind the door but hearing every word. "That's the woman who tied me to the tracks." The millionaire turned to see his daughter there, her large eyes full of fear but also of surprising courage. In an instant, he crossed the room and picked her up in his arms, protecting her with his body from the venomous gaze of the woman who had tried to kill her. "Call the police," he said to the housekeeper, who had appeared behind the child. Then he looked directly into the eyes of the woman who had destroyed his life. "It's over." The following days were a whirlwind of lawyers, police, and reporters. The story leaked to the press as he feared, spreading across the headlines like wildfire. "Millionaire discovers daughter he thought was dead," and "partner attempts to murder child to hide secret." The millionaire did his best to protect the girl from the media circus, but the external pressures began to mount quickly. Shareholders worried about the negative publicity, lawyers arguing legal implications, and worst of all, authorities questioning his ability to care for a child who hadn't even been officially recognized as his daughter. "Sir," said his legal assistant one tense morning, "Child Protective Services wants a hearing. They're questioning temporary custody." He was in his home study, trying to work while keeping an eye on the girl, who was playing quietly on the nearby couch. Since the revelation about his partner, she had become quieter, as if carrying the weight of memories that a 6-year-old shouldn't have. "They can't just take her from me," he said, clenching his fist on the desk. "I saved her. I'm her father." "Biologically, perhaps," replied the lawyer carefully. "But legally, the situation is complex. There's no birth certificate listing you as the father, no custody documents, and the state could argue that she needs specialized care after the trauma she suffered." The millionaire looked at the girl, who had stopped playing and was watching them with those large, intelligent eyes. She knew they were talking about her, knew that something was wrong. The idea of losing her now, after discovering that she existed, was unbearable. "What do I need to do?" he asked. "First, an official paternity test, then a psychological evaluation of both you and her, and you'll need to prove that you can offer a stable and safe environment." Stable environment. He looked around the luxurious study, at the mansion he had built as a monument to his solitude. How to prove that a man who had lived in isolation for 6 years could be a good father? The answer came from an unexpected source. The girl got up from the couch and walked over to him, climbing into his lap with the naturalness of someone who had always belonged there. "I don't want to leave," she said simply. "I want to stay with you." "And I want you to stay," he replied, hugging her. "But some people think you would be better off somewhere else." Why? It was a simple question, but it cut straight to the center of his fears. Why did they think he couldn't take care of her? Because he was too rich? Because he worked too much? Because he had no experience with children? "They think I don't know how to be a dad," he admitted. She tilted her head, studying his face with seriousness. "But you already are. You saved me, you gave me food, a safe place to sleep. You play with me and you listen to me when I talk. Isn't that being a dad?" Out of the corner of his eye, he saw the lawyer jot something down. He would later find out that the man had written, "Child demonstrates strong and healthy emotional bond with client." But at the moment, all that mattered was the absolute trust in his daughter's eyes. She believed in him when he didn't even believe in himself. The next few days were an intense legal battle. The paternity test confirmed what his heart already knew. She was his biological daughter. But the legal system was less impressed with emotional bonds than with documents and procedures. The situation became even more complicated when the press discovered details about his personal life. Reports about his isolation, his obsessive dedication to work, his lack of close relationships, all of this was used as evidence that he would be an unfit father. "Reclusive billionaire battles for custody of daughter" was the headline that disturbed him the most, not because of its inaccuracy, but because of the truth it contained. He was reclusive. He had isolated himself from the world for 6 years, building walls of work and money to protect his wounded heart. But something was changing. The girl's presence had begun to tear down those walls, piece by piece. He found himself doing things he never imagined, reading stories before bedtime, playing in the garden, worrying if she was eating enough, if she was happy, if she felt loved. One afternoon, while she was drawing at the kitchen table, he realized that he was smiling just from watching her concentrate on her childlike art. When was the last time he had smiled at something so simple? "What are you drawing?" he asked, sitting down next to her. "Our family," she replied without looking up from the paper. He looked at the drawing, 2 stick figures holding hands in front of a big house, one tall figure and one small, both smiling with exaggerated smiles drawn in crayon. "It's just us." "Two," she said, finally looking at him. "But we're still a family, aren't we?" "Yes," he said, his voice hoarse with emotion. "We're a family." But this newfound family was about to face its greatest test. The next day, the official notification would arrive. The custody hearing had been scheduled. He would have to convince a judge that a man who had spent 6 years avoiding human connections could be the father a traumatized girl needed. The morning of the hearing arrived covered in gray clouds that seemed to reflect the millionaire's somber mood. He had spent the night awake, preparing arguments, reviewing documents, trying to anticipate every question the judge might ask. But none of that calmed the storm of anxiety growing in his chest. The girl, for her part, seemed strangely calm. She sat at the breakfast table wearing a light blue dress that the housekeeper had bought especially for the occasion, her brown hair neatly combed. But he could see the tension in her small shoulders, in the way she played with her food instead of eating it. "It's going to be okay," he said, more to himself than to her. "I know," she replied, looking at him with that seriousness that always surprised him. "You're not going to let anyone take me." The unwavering confidence in her voice hit him like a punch to the gut. How could she be so sure when he himself was full of doubts? In the courtroom, the atmosphere was formal and intimidating. The judge, a middle-aged man with grey hair and a stern expression, presided over the session with unquestionable authority. On the other side of the room, representatives from Child Protective Services presented arguments about why the child should be placed in specialized care. "Your Honor," said the social worker, a maternal-looking woman who seemed genuinely concerned about the girl's well-being, While Mr. Millionaire's name is obviously capable of providing materially for the child, there are serious concerns about his emotional capacity to be a father. His own lawyers admit that he has lived in isolation for years, avoiding personal relationships. The millionaire felt each word like a blade. It was true. Everything she said was true, but truth was not the same as the whole truth. Furthermore, the social worker continued, the child has suffered significant trauma. She needs specialized care, intensive therapy, a structured environment with trained professionals. When it was his turn to speak, the millionaire stood up with trembling legs. He had commanded boardrooms with billions at stake, had negotiated with the most powerful men in the world, but he had never felt so nervous. Your Honor, he began, his voice gaining strength as he spoke, it's true that I have lived in isolation in recent years, but that wasn't by choice. It was by pain. The pain of believing that I had lost everything I loved most. He looked at the girl, sitting in the front row with the housekeeper. She gave him a small, encouraging smile. My daughter's presence has changed that. For the first time in 6 years, I have a purpose that goes beyond work and money. She has given me a reason to live again. But you have no experience with children, interrupted the judge. How can you guarantee that you will be able to meet the complex needs of a traumatized child? I can't guarantee it, he admitted, surprising everyone with his honesty. But I can guarantee that I will learn. I can guarantee that I will fight for her every day. I can guarantee that she will never feel abandoned or rejected again. His voice broke slightly on the last sentence, remembering how he had found her tied and terrified on the tracks. Your Honor, said his lawyer, standing up, we would like to call a witness. To everyone's surprise, it was the housekeeper who took the stand. The middle-aged woman who had worked in the house for over a decade spoke with a firm and clear voice. I've seen this man over the past 6 years, she said. I saw how he shut himself off from the world after losing the woman he loved. But in the past few weeks, I've seen a transformation that I never thought possible. She looked directly at the judge. He learns her favorite cartoons so they can watch them together. He's changed his entire work schedule to be present. He listens to her with a patience I've never seen before. And most importantly, she trusts him completely. But that's only been a few weeks, argued the social worker. How do we know this change is permanent? It was then that something unexpected happened. The girl got up from her chair and, before anyone could stop her, walked to the front of the room. Can I talk? She asked, her small voice clear in the silent room. The judge hesitated, looking at the lawyers on both sides. This is highly irregular. Please, she said, looking directly at him with those large eyes. I want to talk. There was a moment of tense silence before the judge nodded. Very well, but keep it brief. The girl turned to look at the entire room, her small hands clasped in front of her. I know you think he can't take care of me because he was sad for a long time. But I was sad too. Mommy died, and then bad people hurt me. Her voice trembled slightly, but she continued. But when he found me, he didn't think about himself. He saved me even when the train was coming. And after, he gave me a house, food, and most importantly, he gave me love. She looked directly at the millionaire. He reads stories to me every night. He lets me help cook even when I make a mess. He teaches me new things every day. And when I have nightmares about the mean lady, he stays with me until I'm not scared anymore. Tears began to stream down the millionaire's face. The room was completely silent. I don't want to go to a place with people who don't know me, she continued. I want to stay with my dad because he already knows me. He knows I like to draw, that I'm afraid of the dark, that I love stories about brave princesses. And I know him too. I know he's sad sometimes, but now he smiles more. I know he works a lot, but he always has time for me. She paused, wiping her tears with the back of her hand. "You say he doesn't know how to be a dad, but he's already my dad, and I'm already his daughter. Doesn't that count?" The silence that followed was broken only by the muffled sound of someone crying in the gallery. The judge cleared his throat, clearly moved by the unexpected testimony. "Young lady," he said gently, "are you sure you want to stay with him?" "I'm sure," she replied without hesitation. "He's my family." The millionaire could no longer hold back the tears. In that moment, he realized that it didn't matter what the court decided. This brave child had given him the greatest gift possible, the certainty that he was loved and accepted exactly as he was. The judge leaned back in his chair, clearly touched by the girl's testimony, but still wrestling with the legal complexities of the case. The silence in the room was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock that marked the longest seconds of the millionaire's life. "Young lady," said the judge, addressing the girl gently, "you may return to your seat now. Thank you for your courage." She nodded and walked back, but not before stopping beside the millionaire and whispering, "I love you, Daddy." The word "Daddy" echoed through the room like a bell, touching hardened hearts and reminding everyone present that behind all the legal formalities, there was a real child with real feelings. The judge turned to the social worker. "Dr. Martinez, in your professional assessment, considering the testimony we've just heard, what would be your recommendation?" The woman hesitated, clearly conflicted. "Your Honor, I must admit that the bond between them is evident and appears genuine. However, my concerns about the petitioner's lack of experience with traumatized children remain." "What if there were professional supervision?" asked the judge. "Mandatory family therapy, regular visits from social workers, a monitored transition." "No period." The millionaire's lawyer stood up quickly. "My client accepts any conditions that Your Honor deems necessary." The millionaire nodded vigorously. He would do anything, accept any supervision, undergo any necessary evaluation. Nothing mattered more than keeping his daughter safe and with him. But it was then that the situation took an unexpected turn. The courtroom door opened and a middle-aged man in a dark suit hurried in carrying a file of documents. "Your Honor," said the newcomer, approaching the judge's bench, "I'm District Attorney James Anderson. There are new developments in this case that may significantly affect your decision." The judge frowned. "What kind of developments?" "The investigation into the woman who attempted to kill the child has revealed a wider conspiracy. We've discovered that she didn't act alone." A murmur ran through the room. The millionaire felt his blood run cold. What other terrible revelations awaited? "She was funded by a group of investors who benefited from Mr. Millionaire's last name's emotional instability," continued the district attorney, using the generic term to preserve privacy. "As long as he remained isolated and focused solely on work, they had control over several important corporate decisions." "Are you saying there was a conspiracy to keep my client away from his daughter for financial reasons?" asked the defense attorney, incredulous. "Exactly. We have evidence that the accident that supposedly killed the child's mother was sabotage. And when they found out she had survived and given birth, they paid to keep it a secret. The attempted murder of the child was a desperate measure when the secret began to leak." The millionaire felt nauseated. His life had been manipulated for years, not just by one obsessed woman, but by a whole group of greedy people who saw his pain as an opportunity for profit. "Your Honor," continued the district attorney, "considering that Mr. Millionaire's last name was the victim of a criminal conspiracy that deprived him of his daughter for 6 years, and considering the courage and love he has demonstrated in saving and protecting her, I believe that denying him custody would be a second victimization." The judge absorbed this information in silence, occasionally glancing at the girl, who watched everything with large, attentive eyes. Finally, he addressed the millionaire directly. "Sir, stand up." The millionaire obeyed, his legs trembling slightly. "In my 30 years presiding over this court, I have rarely seen a case so complex and touching. It's clear that you have been the victim of a terrible injustice. It's clear that your daughter has a strong emotional bond with you. It's also clear that you have a lot of love to give, but little practical experience." Each word was like an emotional roller coaster. The millionaire couldn't decipher if the judge was preparing to grant or deny custody. "However," continued the judge, "it is also clear that this brave child knows exactly where she wants to be and with whom she wants to be. And your willingness to accept supervision and therapy shows maturity and genuine commitment." The judge paused, looking around the room. "Furthermore, separating a child from a biological parent who has demonstrated love and protection, especially after she has suffered so much trauma, would be cruel and potentially detrimental to her development." The millionaire's heart was beating so loudly that he was sure everyone in the room could hear it. "Therefore," said the judge, banging his gavel, "I grant temporary custody to the child's biological father with the following conditions: weekly family therapy for at least 6 months, monthly visits from Child Protective Services for 1 year, and a review hearing in 6 months to assess progress." The room exploded into murmurs and movement, but all the millionaire could hear was his daughter's cry of joy as she ran to him and jumped into his arms. "We won, Daddy! We won!" He held her close, tears of relief and gratitude streaming freely down his face. "Yes, little star, we won." But as he looked into her eyes, he realized that the real victory hadn't happened in the courtroom. It had happened the moment he decided to stop the car that foggy afternoon and save an unknown child. Everything that came after was just the universe correcting a terrible wrong and giving them back their lost time. As they left the courthouse, surrounded by reporters and camera flashes, he whispered in her ear, "Now we can start our real life." "Our life already started," she replied, wise beyond her years. "It started the day you found me." And for the first time in 6 years, the millionaire knew that the future would be better than the past. 6 months later, the mansion that once echoed, only with the sound of solitary footsteps, had transformed into a real home. Children's laughter filled the halls. Colorful drawings decorated the walls, alongside expensive artwork, and toys scattered on the marble floor created a charming contrast between luxury and family life. The millionaire was in the garden, pushing a swing set that he had specially installed for his daughter. She laughed as she flew higher and higher, her brown hair dancing in the afternoon wind. He couldn't stop smiling, something that had become a constant habit in recent months. "Higher, Daddy, higher!" she shouted, stretching her little legs to touch the imaginary clouds. "Not too high," he replied, "but increase the momentum anyway. I don't want you to fly away from me." "I'll never fly away," she said, looking over her shoulder with that smile that lit up his world. "We're a team, remember? A team." Yes, they were exactly that. In recent weeks, they had faced together every therapy session, every visit from the social worker, every adaptation that their new life required. And in each challenge, they had become stronger. "Mr. Millionaire's last name," said the housekeeper's voice behind him. "Dr. Martinez is here for the monthly visit." He stopped the swing gently. "Is it that time already?" In the early months, these visits from the social worker made him nervous, as if it were an exam that he could fail. But now he welcomed them with confidence. He was certain that any impartial observer would see what he saw, a family that worked, that loved each other, that was growing together. Dr. Martinez appeared in the garden, her professional expression masking a smile that he had learned to recognize. She had become more than a supervisor. She had become an ally, someone who genuinely cared about the well-being of both him and the girl. "Good afternoon," she said, waving to the child on the swing. "How are things going?" "Better every day," he replied honestly. As they walked back towards the house, the girl running ahead of them to show off her latest drawings, Dr. Martinez asked her routine questions. How was the school adaptation going? How were the nights of sleep? Were there signs of regression or trauma? The answers painted the picture of a child who was thriving. She had adapted quickly to the private school he had carefully chosen, making friends and impressing teachers with her intelligence and resilience. The nightmares had diminished drastically, replaced by dreams about adventures and brave princesses. "And you?" asked Dr. Martinez, watching him closely. "How are you coping with the changes in your life?" He considered the question carefully. "I used to think my life was about building an empire, accumulating achievements. Now I realize that all of that was just a distraction from real life, which would be this," he said, pointing to the girl who was now inside, proudly showing a drawing to the housekeeper. "Being present for someone who needs you, being part of something bigger than yourself. Love." Dr. Martinez nodded, making notes in her file. "And work? How have you managed to balance your corporate responsibilities with fatherhood?" "Delegation," he replied with a smile. "I've discovered that my company runs quite well without my constant presence. In fact, it runs better. When you have a clear reason to be home, you become much more efficient in the office." It was true. In recent months, he had completely restructured his schedule. He worked from 9 to 5 when possible, and rarely took work home. Weekends were sacred, dedicated entirely to his daughter, and, surprisingly, his company had thrived under this new approach. "Is there anything else you'd like to discuss?" asked Dr. Martinez. He hesitated for a moment, then decided to share something that he had been thinking about in recent weeks. "I'm considering starting a foundation for children in situations similar to what my daughter faced. Orphans, children, lost in the system, victims of neglect." "That's wonderful," she said, genuinely impressed. "What inspired you?" "Her," he replied, looking at the girl. "She showed me that there are so many children who need someone to save them, to believe in them. If I can use my position and resources to help, even if it's one child at a time, it's worth it." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of the inspiration herself, who ran to them carrying a new drawing. "Look what I made," she said, holding out the paper. "It's our house, but in the future." The drawing showed the mansion, but with interesting additions: an elaborate playground, a swimming pool, and several small figures playing in the garden. "Who are these other children?" asked Dr. Martinez. "They're my brothers and sisters," replied the girl matter-of-factly. "Daddy said maybe we can help other kids who don't have a mommy and daddy. They can come play here and be part of our family too." The millionaire felt his heart warm. Without him realizing it, the conversations about the foundation had planted seeds in his daughter's imaginative mind, and she had created a vision of the future that was even more beautiful than anything he had imagined. "That sounds wonderful," said Dr. Martinez, looking meaningfully at him. "A family that grows through generosity." Later that night, after the social worker had left with a clearly positive report, he was reading a bedtime story to his daughter. It was a routine that had become sacred to both of them. 30 minutes of fairy tales, adventures and dreams before she fell asleep. "Daddy," she said sleepily, "do you remember when you found me on the tracks?" "Every day," he replied, stroking her hair. "Do you think it was fate?" The question caught him by surprise. "What do you mean?" "Well, if the mean lady hadn't put me there, and if you hadn't decided to buy that ranch, and if you hadn't driven down that road at exactly that time." She paused, processing her thoughts. "Maybe it all happened so we could find each other." He considered her words. All the coincidences, all the seemingly random events that had led to that moment on the tracks. The impulsive purchase of the ranch, the meeting that had delayed him, even the fog that had reduced his speed on the right curve. "Maybe you're right," he said, kissing her forehead. Maybe fate conspired to bring us together. I think so, she murmured, already half asleep. Because we're a real family now, and real families always find a way to stay together. While she slept, he sat by the bed for a while, just watching her peaceful breathing. 6 months ago, he was a lost man, wandering through an empty life disguised as success. Today, for the first time in years, he knew exactly who he was and what his purpose was. He left the room quietly and went down to his study. On the desk, next to financial reports and business proposals, was the drawing that his daughter had made earlier, her vision of their house in the future, full of children playing and laughing. Beside it, a folder with the preliminary plans for the foundation he was creating, Little Star Foundation he had decided to call it, in honor of the nickname his fiancée had given to the daughter she never got to meet, but who was now the light of his life. He picked up the phone and dialed a number he had memorized in recent weeks. "Hello, Marcus. It's me. I know it's late, but I needed to talk to you about the foundation. Yes, I've decided. I want us to start immediately." Over the next 20 minutes, he discussed details about creating a model orphanage, assisted adoption programs, and scholarships for vulnerable children. It was ambitious, but he had learned that ambitious dreams were exactly what the world needed. When he hung up the phone, he sensed a presence in the doorway. His daughter was there, standing in her pajamas, hair tousled and eyes sleepy. "Why aren't you sleeping, little star? I heard you talking," she said, walking over to him and climbing into his lap. "You were talking about helping other kids." "I was. You don't mind that I use some of the time to help other people?" She looked at him with that seriousness that always surprised him. "Daddy, when you saved me on the tracks, you weren't just thinking about yourself, were you?" "No," he admitted. "I just knew you needed help." "Then that's who you are. You save people. Now that you've saved me, you can save other kids too." She snuggled against his chest. "But you promise you'll always come home to me?" "Always," he promised, hugging her. "You're my number one priority forever. And I'm your number one too," she said, smiling. "We're a team, remember? The best team in the world." 3 months later, the first ceremony of the Little Star Foundation took place on the grounds of the mansion. 20 orphaned children had been selected for the pilot program. Each would receive complete education, psychological counseling, and most importantly, carefully selected and prepared adoptive families. The Millionaire was on the makeshift stage, looking out at the audience of prospective families, social workers, and journalists. But his eyes sought only one person in the front row, his daughter, dressed in a yellow dress that resembled the one she wore on the day they met, but now clean, new, and radiant. "A year ago," he began his speech, "I was a man who had lost faith in love, in family, in the possibility of redemption. I believed that my life was about accumulating material achievements. I was wrong." He paused, meeting his daughter's eyes. "A brave child taught me that true wealth is not in what we possess, but in who we love and who loves us back. She taught me that families are not only created by blood, but by choice, by commitment, by unconditional love." Applause echoed through the gardens, but he continued, "The Little Star Foundation exists because we believe that every child deserves a second chance, a family that will fight for them, someone who believes in their potential, because we believe that sometimes saving a child means saving yourself." After the ceremony, as families mingled with the children from the program, he walked through the gardens with his daughter. She was radiant, helping the other children feel welcome, introducing them to prospective adoptive parents with the confidence of someone who had found her own family. "I'm proud of you," he said, watching her help a younger girl reach a toy. "Why?" "For being exactly who you are. Brave, kind, generous. You've inspired me to be a better person. She stopped what she was doing and looked at him with that wisdom that always surprised him. "Daddy, you know what Mommy used to tell me about stars?" "What?" "That they shine brightest when the sky is darkest. You were in your darkest sky when you found me. But now—" She gestured to all the children playing, all the families forming around them. "Now we're a sky full of stars." He picked her up, too emotional to speak. She was right. They had started as two broken people who found each other in their darkest hour. But together, they had created something luminous, something that illuminated not only their own lives, but the lives of dozens of others. "I love you, little star," he whispered in her ear. "I love you too, Daddy, forever and ever." As the sun set over the grounds of the mansion, painting the sky with hues of gold and pink, the millionaire who had once lived alone in an empty palace was now surrounded by a family he had chosen and who had chosen him back. He had discovered that true wealth was not in any of his material possessions, but in the embraces of his daughter, in the laughter that filled his home, and in the certainty that he had found his purpose. And somewhere beyond the clouds, he could imagine his fiancée smiling, knowing that the family they had dreamed of together had finally become a reality. Not in the way they had planned, but in a way that was even more beautiful. Their story had begun with tragedy and separation, but it ended with love and unity. And that, he realized, was the perfect definition of redemption. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications to receive new stories every day. What would you do in the millionaire's shoes? Comment below and share this story with someone special.